Hello, how are you? My job is to talk to Irish people. I talk to people from all over the place, but the vast majority are Irish. And a lot of the Irish people that I speak to, they don't live in Ireland anymore, or they've just gone back, or they're thinking about leaving. And a question that often comes to their mind is a question that weighs heavily on their hearts. And in this episode of Healing from Irishness, we're going to look at that question. So, my dear loyal listeners, ladies and gentlemen, Colini Bukali, welcome to Healing from Irishness. And this episode, we're going to look at the question that dogs many, many Irish. Can you ever go home again? Hello, how are you? This episode has been inspired by just some conversations I've had recently with clients, all wondering about going home. Clients who have lived outside of Ireland for most of their lives and feel a deep sense of loneliness about that decision. They've set up lives in other places, they've made friends in other places, but they're torn. They feel the pull of Ireland. And so we've been having lots of conversations about this. I myself feel the pull of Ireland. I left Ireland first when I was 17 and I came back and I left again. And if you've been listening to this podcast, you'll know that I often talk about a desire to return and just waiting for the opportunity, an opportunity which I've also kind of surrendered to the idea may never come. But the feeling is still there. And my thoughts are littered with very colorful, nostalgic memories of Ireland, which aren't always true, but such is the way with nostalgia. And what I want to talk about in this episode is really the emotional reasons why people leave Ireland. We're very much aware of the economic reasons of why we leave. Like Ireland, for the longest time, hasn't been a country that has taken care of its children, and much of that, of course, was to do with the horrible conditions in Ireland and the difficulty of sovereignty in Ireland. But in modern times, as we have become an independent and wealthy nation, we still don't take care of our children. This is a pattern that we haven't disrupted. And so, as young people growing up in Ireland, the sense is always that you're on your own and you must do it on your own. And so we leave. This doesn't happen in other countries, you know? In other countries, children leave. Young people leave for adventure. They leave because they want to see the world. For many Irish people, we leave because there's nothing for us in Ireland. The doors are closed, the opportunities don't exist, and it's demoralizing. We don't get the chance to fully grow. But what I want to talk about in this episode is something that is completely disconnected to economics, but I believe is just as important and is just as a powerful factor in our decision to stay or go. And that is the pressure of Irish society and the difficulty that we have becoming individuals if we stay in Ireland. So let's start by me introducing a word from the psychomagical lexicon, and that word is field. Now, when I'm talking about field here, I'm not talking about a field where you'd put a pile of heifers or some sheep in. I'm talking about the shared energetic space, right? So for Irish people, the families that we grow up into our fields are these shared energetic spaces. We grow up into them, and what happens is we we associate. We are emotionally connected to this field. So this means that the thought system of your parents is also inside you. The emotional resonance of your immediate family members plays through you. This is like it's like these sort of, those Venn diagrams where two spheres meet. This is the Irish family field. And what happens is that um, understanding who you are becomes very, very difficult because of the density of our family field. So what it is this family field, like it includes like kind of a moral universe. This is also why Irish people have this tendency to be so conservative, because it's very difficult for us to escape this field. It's very difficult for us to move beyond the categories of reason that we've inherited. Um, and what this means is that we end up living the lives of our parents, we end up living the lives of our grandparents. And if we find this to be at any level kind of unpleasant, it's very difficult to get out of this. It's very difficult. Now the purpose of your life is to individuate. The purpose of your life is to become your authentic self. Now, in order to become that authentic self, you need to step out of the family field. You need to step out of this shared moral universe. I always think back to like when I lived in Berlin for a long time, and a lot of my friends were gay men from Ireland. And the only way that they could really individuate, the only way they could become their authentic self, was to put as much distance between themselves and Ireland as possible. The difficulty with Ireland is its geography. The difficulty is also the lack of diversity there. You can talk about places like Dublin, as a sort of a city where you can go to. No, well, let me just backtrack. The point of all cities is that they create spaces of anonymity. And this is why cities are very dynamic. You move to a city and you change. You move to a city and you can like rapidly advance in your individuation. This is the sort of the personal development whole point of cities. Dublin as a kind of should provide that in Ireland, but it often doesn't. It's still like very hard to be anonymous in Dublin. You go to Dublin and the clan element of and the family element is still so present. Jesus, like I remember all my years living in Dublin and just you're running into people. People can kind of place you all the time. This is the thing that happens when you move to a new city typically is nobody can place you. So they just base you. They kind of they put you, they deal with you as you are. In Dublin, being from the country, you immediately get placed in that box. Being into a certain kind of way, you get placed inside that box. So it's difficult. All your development is consistently blocked. The other problem with this is there's a kind of an emotional enmeshment that goes on. We tend to kind of our relationship with our families is all based on guilt and loyalty and closeness, this sort of contractual closeness, right? Where you'll notice that things, of course, they're not always said explicitly, but they're felt energetically. And I think this is very important to kind of remember. Um, we're moving into an era in our personal evolution where feelings are king, right? Feelings really are the future. And you'll notice that sort of the things that are said are just way less important. What is felt is more important. And we have grown up, a lot of us. I speak in general broad strokes here because it's my podcast and I get to do this. But we have grown up in homes where things weren't said, but they were certainly felt. And so the emotional enmeshment deepened all the time. And so the feeling that we often had with our families was this one of guilt for not being more involved, and guilt for whenever we stepped more into our individuation, and then guilt for not being close enough. So there's an interesting thing going on there. There's also a kind of, and yeah, and this interesting thing is that we recognize at a very young age that there is a limit to our development based on that results from our proximity to our families, because the pressure of the moral universe in our families, this pressure that just doesn't allow us to really become our radical selves, is so much that the only way to escape it, because it's often impossible to escape it inside Ireland itself, the only way to escape it is to leave, is to emigrate. And here's the thing that nobody really says out loud: Ireland needs you to leave. Ireland needs a lot of its immigrants to leave. And it's because it's a country that often runs on guilt and obligation. And if you are breaking out of that, then it needs a pressure valve. You are that pressure valve, right? By you leaving, you're kind of exporting the problem. When you stay, you'll confront the problem. So, in a way, this element that we have in art and this strong culture, this moral universe based on guilt and obligation, it doesn't allow you to stay. And in this way, that your emigration wasn't really a tragedy, it was kind of a design feature. Ireland exports those who are different. So the family field, the structure, the conditioning, the program can stay intact. And there's something about immigration that functions as this great permission slip. I know that, for example, when I left Kildare, where I grew up, and I moved to Dublin, it wasn't far enough away. I can remember, like, it's funny. I'm recording this on Easter, but I remember one Easter there was a rave up in Donabate, and I went up to the rave, and I remember taking acid, and it was this in the sand dunes, and I was incredibly high. My sister was with me. We both took acid. We were with a load of people, and we were doing this thing called candy flipping, which is where you would take pills and acid, and it was wild crack altogether. And I remember leaving the party, and the sun was coming up, and we were walking along the beach to the car park. It must have been like 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and to make our way back into Dublin, to get on a bus and to go home for Easter Sunday lunch. So there was something about this. There's nowhere you can go in Ireland that is far enough away from the family field. There's nowhere you can go in Ireland that is far enough away from these programs of guilt and loyalty and the necessity for closeness. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong to be close to your family, but if you are trying to individuate, if you are really trying to become your own self, then it will be difficult to do that in the moral universe of your family. So moving away, emigrating, is a solution because it gives you permission to really become yourself. I know for me that I went and I lived in Berlin for so many years, and it was just the greatest permission slip to be an absolute mess, to be an absolute chancer. I could go there and just work in bars and drink every night and end up in all kinds of relationships with people who I would never consider bringing home to my family. But if I had met this person, say in Dublin or something, the pressure would have been there. I would have felt the emotional enmeshment. I would have felt the need to divulge, to confess to my family and introduce him to whoever I was dating at the time. Emigrating, moving away, removed all of that. I had full permission. And what I'm trying to say in this podcast is that your distance from your family enables individuation, it enables growth. And maybe you come from a family where there haven't been any inhibitions upon your growth. Maybe you come from a family that have raised you to just be the blank canvas, to think for yourself, to do what you want to do. But my bet is that the vast majority of us haven't. The vast majority of us, even though it hasn't been explicitly said to us, still feel energetically our parents' disappointment and our parents' approval. And this functions as a kind of a perimeter, an electric wire around an electric fence around our individuation. And so emigration, yes, it's a solution to the economic difficulties of growing up in Ireland, but also, and I think the bigger problem, and is that emigration is the solution for our individuation, for our capacity to become authentic, which in the long run, authenticity is so much more important than economic survival. And I want to talk just briefly as well here about the ones who stayed. And I remember in 2008 when I left and just seeing some people sort of, and everyone was leaving. We were all spilling out of the country. It was like the whole place was sinking and we had to jump off. I remember people on Twitter sort of saying things like, oh, those who stay, when the good times come back, those who stay should all be rewarded, and this sort of idea. And even today, you still hear some language from people saying, "Oh, what are these people doing down on Bondi Beach? They could just as well be on Tramore Beach." And what it does is it romanticizes and even hierarchicalizes those who stuck it out, the ones who didn't run away, as though running away is somehow the coward's thing. To be honest, I think it would be beautiful to not have to run away. And but I want to talk about a lot of the people who left because a lot of them didn't stay because they were courageous. I think they stayed because the pull of the field was just too strong. I think it takes tremendous courage to escape the field. Because when the pull of the field is so strong, you almost feel that you are the field. You cannot distinguish between you and the cultural enmeshment. And so leaving feels like a type of death. And so I think a lot of the people who stayed, they made themselves smaller in order to stay. And they called this loyalty. And those of us who left, and I would include myself here, and not as someone who's left and gone back and left and could indeed go back again, we had to go about things in a very different way. And so I think somehow this romanticizing of those who stayed um, is often like a tricky thing because I wonder about the repercussions. I wonder what they had to do and what compromises they had to make at a personal development level in order to stay. And was the reason that they stayed was because they were also, or they were more committed to maintaining the field than to actually exploring what individuation might look like for them. And the the problem you could say with the tradition in Ireland, is that we do have this tradition of exporting young people. I mean, it's when you read, if you ever read John McGarn and books from the 60s, 70s, and 80s in Ireland, we it was what you did. You either got a job as a civil servant, and there weren't so many of those, or if you were a farmer, you worked for your dad, um, or you went to England or America. That was it. And we have this tradition, and it's been happening for over 200 years. So it means that, like, culturally, we've developed a kind of a narrative. We've developed a sort of a story around departure that it is, yes, it's sad, but it's just done. You could even say it's become the Irish way. And I think this story has become a kind of a cover because by saying it's the Irish way, it normalizes one level that Ireland is a country that can't sustain its young people. But two, it also covers up the emotional function of leaving, that young people feel that they cannot breathe when they are enmeshed, when they are stuck within the emotional field of their parents. The thing with this leaving is that there's something almost convenient about it. It's almost kind of insidious in its convenience, in that what it does is it lets the family off the hook. So if leaving is just the Irish tradition, then nobody has to kind of ask the harder question. And the harder question is, why is it so difficult for so many of us to breathe in Ireland? Why is it so difficult for so many of us to just be ourselves? Why is it the tradition that so many of us have to leave, we have to cross water in order to actually just become who we were really meant to be? Young people feel that they never get to really become themselves. And this is a problem because um, basically all our innovation, all our happiness, all our sense of satisfaction is dependent upon young people breaking from the conservative traditions of their parents. It's dependent upon young people bringing in new ways. You got to understand it like this: every generation that lands on this earth lands here equipped with intuitive, inherent skills to survive on this earth. Your grandparents, your parents had this requisite skills to survive. This is why you could say to a certain extent that older generations are less emotionally fluent. They needed to be less emotionally fluent because that was how they could function. When you think about how, like your parents or your grandparents, they would have worked themselves to the bone. They would have put all happiness aside for the sake of family. These were skills, skills that enabled them to function for the time. You have been born with a different set of skills. It's a heightened sensitivity. It's an inability to just repeat the patterns. It's a kind of a rebellion. That rebellion isn't a dysfunction. That rebellion is a design feature in you, because what is supposed to happen is you're supposed to usher in a whole new way of being. And this is possibly why you had to go away. You had to create distance. You had to escape from your family field. When I think about my own life and I think about my parents, and as much as I can acknowledge their love and acknowledge what they did for me, um, and with much grace, I give gratitude for them. I can also recognize that they were a product of their family fields. And I know my dad was from from the north, and his way of escaping his family field was by marrying a young Catholic girl from the south and coming down to Kildare. So he got away. And I know that when I was growing up and when I was first beginning to kind of create my own personality and move away from home, there was still a part of me that was always looking for their approval. You know, and it was something kind of inappropriate, I remember, about the way that I would do that, or I was quite confessional to my parents. You know, I would tell them about when I was 18, 19, 18, I was living in Dublin and I was working in the Kitchen nightclub, and it was the beginning of like a very good time in Dublin's like nightlife, and there was lots of drugs around. There were lots of new drugs around. It was sort of the age of ecstasy and rave and things like this, and there was so much excitement. and so much liberation was happening. I mean, there was also, not to glorify the time, because people were kind of really suffering then. Nobody had mental health language or containers, and a few of our friends died. They committed suicide in those days. And so, but what was happening for me was a huge expansion of all my experiences. I'd gone from a small village being a very unpopular person in school to now making cocktails in nightclubs, and been able to, and been on guest lists everywhere, and suddenly feeling like I had status and power, and going home and telling my family like lots of stories about things and looking for their approval, almost looking for their permission to live this life, which I didn't always get. And this was just uh, symbolic of how deep, deeply entrenched I was in my family field, that I still needed to get their approval for my life. And I think for many of us, this is the the difficulty that we experience with our family, is because we grow up, and this is deeply biological. We grow up with such a huge need for love and touch and affection. We come into this world incredibly vulnerable, vulnerable by design, in a way that other animals don't share that vulnerability. Like, we really are incapacitated for the first years of our life in ways that other animals aren't. I mean, you see giraffes walking hours after popping at their mom. So there's something in this vulnerability by design, this almost like this hopelessness by design, which makes us very wedded to our families, and it turns us into very clever manipulators of our families. We know how to find their approval, and we know what looks good. We know how to perform. But ultimately, this robs us of our happiness, because our happiness is based upon our courage to live life authentically. And this leads us back to emigration. And I'm not saying that the number one reason that we leave home is to become ourselves, but it's a huge factor. And I feel it's not spoken about enough. And as a result, Irish people don't get this opportunity to share in these things. It's often just the Irish way, the tradition of leaving, the sadness that we have, the acceptance, but the inability to really touch on the emotional factors behind all of this does us a disservice, because when we can talk about it, when we can express it, then we can begin to change it. Because really, I think the mark of your healing, and that's what this whole podcast is about, it's about the deep healing of Irish people. People often ask me when I do sessions, they say like, can you go home again? I have someone come to me and maybe they haven't lived in Ireland in 50 years, or they've been out as little as 5 years, and they're wondering if they can go back. And I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's not a question I can answer. Um, because what you can do is you can visit and you can be back in your kitchen table, but you could never re-enter the person you were before you left, because that person was never fully real. So if you go back, you can't go back the way that you were, because the reason you left was because you couldn't stand that performance anymore. The performance for your family, the performance for your community, the performance for the country at large. The person who left, the person who you've become since you've gone away, that one's real. And home, if home even exists, it is sort of just a sense. It's a feeling inside yourself. It's a feeling of belonging. And that might not exist in Ireland anymore. So when people ask me this question, if they can go back, I say I'm not sure. But the important thing is, if you feel at home, then maybe you don't need to. So that's all I want to talk about for today. Um, I hope maybe if you've been in this situation or you're considering this situation, if you're in Ireland and you're wondering what to do, or you've left Ireland and you still haven't really kind of managed to maybe forgive yourself for going away, then hopefully this podcast will help. Anyway, so my name's Connor, and you might have got that at the top. I have a community, and in that community, we dive a little bit deeper into more spiritual stuff. I look at ways of really helping people become authentic and individuating. It's a Patreon community. There's one tier. Actually, that's not true. And I have another tier. If you enjoy this podcast and you want to just say thank you and help support what I'm doing, you can do that there as well. I have one-on-one sessions if you want to talk about your life, if you want a little bit of direction and coaching or just someone to listen to you. That's it. Take care of yourselves. Be kind. Listen to your feelings. Accept yourself. I really feel probably the most useful thing Irish people can do is wake up in the morning and just repeat the expression, I like me. I like me. I like me. And then as you're going to bed, do the same thing. I like me. I like me. All right. Slán. Take care. Sleep well. Love yous. Bye bye.